Hi there, and welcome to the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast with me, Bruce Hallis, your host on the show. Today is the first day of a very, very exciting week here at the podcast. And for me personally, we have Information Security Europe, which is probably the largest conference and exhibition in Europe regarding information security. And I've been really, really lucky to have been invited on as a keynote presenter to maybe stir up the debate around security awareness, behaviour and culture, using my work on the SABAC framework to sort of initiate discussion. So yeah, incredibly exciting week ahead. In fact, the keynote is tomorrow afternoon. And the team are going to be really, really busy in terms of trying to share with people sort of insights around awareness, behaviour and culture. And I'm specifically going to be looking at the challenges of behaviour and culture. So if you're going to be there, it'd be great to see you there. And you can reach out and see whether or not we can get our heads together. And with that in mind, it being the biggest European information security conference, it's going to be an absolute pleasure today to introduce you to Ed Tucker. Ed Tucker was the European CISO of the Year last year off the back of his work at HMRC, the Revenue and Tax Collecting Authority here in the United Kingdom. And Ed agreed to come on the show. He's been listening to the podcast and he's basically shared with us today his thoughts, lessons he's learned, insights he wants to pass on around security, awareness, behaviour and culture. And so without any further ado, let's get on with the interview. Hi everybody, today we've got Ed Tucker with us who spent some time to go through the episodes, I think it was 4, 5 and 6, which is with Ciaran, Gert and Robert. And he's going to share some insights of things that he's picked up from that, and we're going to use those and we're going to expand and have a general chat around rethinking the human factor. So without any further ado, let's say hello to Ed. Hi Ed.
Hi Bruce, thanks very much for inviting me along.
Absolute pleasure. So I know who you are. I'm sure a number of the followers of the podcast know who you are, but do you think you could just let those who've never come across Ed before know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So like many people of my age, which, being security, I'm a middle-aged Caucasian male.
Yep.
Fell into security. It wasn't really a career that existed when I started out on my wonderful career path, having failed my A-levels. It was one of the things that I fell into, and I've worked in security on and off for probably the best part of 15 years now, both from retail sector, so pub retailers, through to major outsourced suppliers and across government. Most people will probably know me from the head of cybersecurity role at the joy that is the taxman, the good old HMRC, where I built the cybersecurity function from literally a team of one up to a team that at the moment is about 40 strong and doing some really special things across government. Having spent 8 years in government and finally dodged the lobotomy, I decided to take the swing. And it wasn't evil enough being, not just security, but also security in the taxman. So really universally disliked by everyone. I decided to become a vendor just so I could have proper universal hatred. And I've been there for about 9 months.
Okay. And how's everything going?
It's a whole different culture. So the premise of the organisation I'm with now, which is DP Governance, is trying to help people do data protection properly. From years of experience of doing it in organisations and working through all the pitfalls of all the traditional controls that we think work and actually don't when it comes to business operation, and all the interdependencies with many policies and procedures across that sit outside of IT and security, but actually have a material impact in the risk to data. The biggest problem is I think most organisations still don't get it.
Yes. Okay, we're on the right show then, aren't we? So now I'm getting a sense that you might be modest.
If you're a friend of me on Facebook, I play the narcissist very well.
So one of the things we know about you, and you don't really bang the drum on this one, but we're going to bang the drum for you on your behalf, is that you were voted European CISO of the Year. Was that right? It was either last year or the year before. I can't quite remember.
Last year. So going round InfoSec the day after was hard because of the hangover. But quite nice because I had a nice award in my bag to get out whenever I wanted.
Yeah. What's the reward like, by the way? I mean,
it's a serious piece of kit. Yeah, it's a big metal award with some serious weight to it. So yeah, after carrying it for about 3 hours, I'd really regretted my decision.
To carry it or to win it?
Winning it was nice. To be fair, there was some major things that we did at HMRC, and I can be a bit of an outspoken oik at times. Hopefully, with the right message. Genuinely, I know everyone says this. It was a team achievement. I'm happy to take the plaudits. It was brilliant for me, but it's also recognition to all the guys that I worked with at HMRC.
Yeah, and I think that's what it's about. Leadership's really about setting the direction and getting the right people on board, and helping and enabling people to go down that particular journey and achieve the objective, isn't it? Which sounds easy, but actually, that's hard in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think the greatest testament to that is that I've been gone 9 months and they're still continuing to thrive. It's not like there's been a gaping hole left behind and they've suddenly ground to a standstill. They're continuing to make waves in the security space across government, which is, that's the biggest compliment I can take from that role.
So we asked you to give us some thoughts from the 3 episodes in particular that we had on the podcast. So the first one was with Robert Madeleine. Yeah. So he was the ex-Director General for 2 departments within the European Commission. So initially it was health, and then he moved to sort of innovation, which also wrapped within that came the whole cybersecurity sort of element as well. And then we had Ciaran, who is a psychologist, award-winning psychologist, and who I've done some work with in the past. And then the third person that we had was Robert, Ciaran, and then Gert-Jan Hofstede, who was brilliant. He's coming back on the show, but Gert-Jan is probably one of the world's most quoted specialists when it comes to national culture and organizational culture. So, yeah, what did you sort of, when you listened to that, what did you come away thinking?
I would absolutely agree with Gert, and glad you're getting him back on. That was one of those that you just wanted the conversation to continue. So sometimes the conversation comes to a natural end, whereas Gert, someone who so obviously enthuses about his subject matter, he's just wonderful to listen to, and there were so many things that resonated. It was brilliant. Yeah. To kind of jump around a little bit, Ciaran brought out the analogy with Moses. Which you kind of thought, well, where's he going with this one? And then he brought it back, with bringing down kind of the commandments and that dictatorial approach of that thou shalt not. You almost sat there looking at the intranet, in an organisation and kind of read the latest security policy, and it is that 10 Commandments feel to it. And it's that archetypal piece of what's wrong with how we do security, how we do awareness, how we do policies and procedures, which really fed into them an aspect that Robert talked about in that almost that build of how we go through things. So starting with that explanatory stage and what is the subject that we're talking about, and then building into the positive incentives and the ease of action. The classic of that is we've had not too long ago the whole Nadine Dorries and password sharing in Parliament, which was a wonderful piece in many ways, because you had a security policy that was full of thou shalt nots. It was on the pertinent aspect was on page 23 of the policy, which really is any human being going to read that far? So you then get into the cultural aspect, and Gert talked about the Germans, and yes, the Germans will be on page 23 wanting more and more and more. In the UK, we're going to get to about line 23 and just give up. Yeah. But also that dependency. So what's wrong with sharing my password? There's never any recognition or driving explanation as to why I shouldn't do that, what the alternatives are, and then understanding there are dependencies outside. So I need IT, I need the access control mechanisms to be really, really sharp. Otherwise, the user's just going to say, do you know what? I'll share my password because it's easier and I want to get my job done. And it really kind of... It drew out a lot of the things that I see wrong in the security industry at the moment, certainly in those who are in-house, in that divorcement from the subject matter and from the ultimate customer, and probably that lack of understanding that the business user, the employee, the external customers, they're all customers of security. And I think security is probably the last area to get into that mantra and that mindset.
That's really interesting, because I've had a mantra for a long time where I've sort of seen security as a product or a service, and you have an internal market, and your job as the person responsible for security within the organization is, it's almost like to design a product and then to market it effectively across your market, which just happens to be an internal market. And then, not just to market it, but to get people to sort of buy it, and actually, buy it. Oh, I don't mean is hand over cash necessarily, although there's a business case investment angle there. It's, to buy it in terms of to commit time to it, to commit an effort to it, a willingness to participate, so that it actually influences your behavior. And it's interesting when people have started to shift and see it as, these are customers internally. They have a choice whether or not they comply in many situations. And actually my job is to get this to increase the likelihood that they are going to comply. And to do that, I've got to seriously think about how people make choices.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Ciaran brought it out, and Robert to a certain extent, of even starting off. So what's the agreed mission for this? What's the desired outcome? How am I going to drive action? And also Ciaran mentioned about that empathy towards the business and understanding kind of that things fail because they don't involve the people affected by them. So it's almost you almost feel that I think security. You're right that the security aspects and the different things we're trying to deliver are part of a service and bolt-ons to that service. And for some reason, we're not cognizant of the people who are going to purchase, in inverted commas, our service, who are going to actually sign up to use it. A brilliant one is where we find users, and sadly a lot of security people won't know whether they do have users or don't comply with their policy. If users don't comply with your policy, it tells you, A, you're not very effective, and B, your policy is not fit for purpose, or you're not aware of the dependencies elsewhere in the organisation that need to enable compliance to be easy and something I want to do. We almost define security services for security people, not for the actual consumer.
That's interesting. So what do you think that's missing in terms of, security professional responsible for education and awareness? The sense I'm getting from you is, there's a lack of, when you use the words empathy there, it's a lack of empathy with the customer, internal market. What do you think's missing from currently how we're doing that, how we're sort of getting to understand the customer, so to speak?
So right from the outset, I'd go back to the mission piece. So why does almost every organisation do education and awareness, security education and awareness? Why do they all do it? And I don't think many organisations would be able to say why beyond we need to raise awareness, we need our users to be cognizant of threats, and frankly, the security industry says that we need to do it. I did a talk recently, basically rubbishing most of the security controls that we put our faith in because they don't work in business operation unless you understand how the business operates. So a firewall is a great example. We all have firewalls. They're a great control. Business operation introduces change introduces an additional rule to the firewall. And we go over that over years and years and years, and all of a sudden you've got a firewall with so many rules that basically its inherent job is to heat a data center. It serves no purpose as a security control, but from a security angle, we say we've still got a firewall. It's absolutely fine. We lack that empathy with how a business operates and how the operation of the business can render my security aspects completely ineffective. I think we lack that mission at the start, and then we don't get into the weeds of what our consumers actually need. And that true understanding of kind of how we can work with them to provide them what we need. We still define things on a security basis. We have security people procuring security education and awareness, computer-based training from security companies, and it's this little myopic sphere, this silo, and then our delivery mechanism is wholly wrong in the main. Most organizations do once a year security training. It's computer-based. It's click next, and then 10 questions that if you get them wrong, frankly, you shouldn't be allowed shoes with laces. Then we pat ourselves on the back and say, lovely, that's that done for the year.
That's really interesting, because obviously a lot of people do rely upon that mandatory training with the once a year, the CBT, here's, some knowledge passing on, and then some competency assessment at the end of it. And if you pass the grade, all well and good. If you don't, then you probably get pushed back to retaking the areas that you failed, for example. But, so what do you think is the limitation around taking that particular approach?
I think from start to finish, it's a complete and utter waste of time and resource. I think the subject matter is wholly wrong because we're trying to teach people to protect the corporate. From a general office employee or an employee of the organisation, when I think of who needs to secure the corporate, well, that's security's job. And that's why we've got firewalls and policies and procedures and all these wonderful things that make it hard for me to do my job. I don't care. I do, but I want to get my job done. And once a year I have to do this. And I've also got to do my health and safety one and probably a couple of others, maybe a diversity one. And I just need to tick them off and get them done because I know I have to do them.
Yeah.
It's not building a culture of actually driving awareness built around what the consumer needs. A great example is that do we teach people to protect their corporate cyberspace or do we teach them to protect their personal cyberspace? Because actually, if I teach them to protect themselves in their home life and their children and things like that, they tend to care a bit more because it's slightly more tangible. And it's exactly the same skills I want to bring into the workplace. But I don't want to do it once a year. I want to get out there. I want to use as many mediums as possible to show that I'm a human face and I have exactly the same needs and requirements that they do at a base level. I may be prejudiced because I've worked in security for a long time, which also means that if I devise the awareness program, I'm doing it from a position of prejudice. I need to involve the consumer. Tell me, that product testing, what is it you want from this? And how many different ways can I deliver it to you? Bearing in mind, it's an overhead to your day job. We're not in bed with the business the way we should be as security professionals.
It's interesting because I remember, it was the chief security officer for Facebook at a conference in the US earlier this year was saying that the need for the industry to be more empathetic towards the customer. He was saying towards the organization, which in effect is the customer. The need to actually, this is interesting because when people talk about awareness, generally within our industry, we're talking about raising awareness about information security. The awareness is almost like a push. We're pushing this awareness out to them. But actually, I think awareness is both ways. And when listening to you, I completely agree that really what you've got is it's about security people becoming aware of their target market in a way, their target audience. And you need to have a degree of empathy to be able to do that effectively as well. And that when you listen to your target audience, they tell you what it is that they actually need in terms of A, security in the first place. And then B, you can have a chat with them about, and the best way to communicate with them to sort of help them make positive choices is for them to tell you rather than you to tell them, because the point you allude to is after 15 years working in security, you've got a bias. You know the subject matter for a start.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you come to appreciate the value of what it is that you do. And it's interesting because in the interview we did with Dan Arley, which is, we haven't asked you to have a look at that one, but in that interview with Dan Arley, he's talking about the challenge he has, with the IT security function at his university. And he said, I don't doubt that it's important. He said, but when I look at it, the values, when I place the value of security against the value that I have of getting my job done, he said the value of getting the job done comes much higher than the value of security. And then he turned around and he said that he thought one of the reasons why that was because actually the security function is not very good at being transparent to enable people to understand what this actually means to them. And the point you made earlier was actually using it, talking about it in the context of what it means at home, where people value things definitely differently, that helps push it up. It makes people feel it's much more, it's more important because the context is, your home life, your family, your friends, all these things, which rightly or wrongly, you might value that a lot more than the environment that you're working in. And I think that's what Dan was getting on at, is that, one of the things we've really got to do as a profession is we've got to communicate actually the value of it more effectively, including the effort that goes into it to produce these things. And hopefully that will just start to rebalance the value perception that the audience has. Yeah, actually, I sort of value security more because I understand what it actually means. I understand what it means to me. I understand what that side of stuff.
You look at services, and any organisation that looks to sell services will do market research. And that doesn't have to be sell for money. That can be sell just for uptake. And yet we don't undertake that market research of what our consumers need. One of the other things that's interesting from what Dan was saying is kind of, many times we ask our employees kind of, do they understand where they fit in the mission of the organisation? And for certain people, yes, yeah, absolutely, 100% I do. And then you talk to someone who works, I don't know, they work, the postman's a bad example, but they work in just a basic admin job. And you go, do you understand how you contribute to the mission of the organisation? No, nor will I ever, because it's not tangible to me. And it's the same from the security. Do you understand how you sit into the security of the organisation and how that safeguards our data? No, I don't, because no one's ever really sold it to me, explained it to me, driven the value of it to me. It's just stuff that I have to do sometimes.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that thing about it's stuff I had to do, and you sort of mentioned I've got to do my health and safety, I've got to do my diversity, and it's interesting because all of these things have great value, not just to the organisation but to individuals and to society. Like, GDPR, health and safety, etc., is there because it sets the expectations that culturally, these are the things that we should be expecting. If you're expecting to share information with an organization, these are your expectations. This is what you expect from sharing that information. And they enshrine that through law, whether it be health and safety or GDPR or whatever. So with that in mind, if people don't value it, is it the fact that we as, those people that are responsible for raising awareness, is it that they have the right competency or skills and then competency, or is it something that they should even be looking at? Do they need to be thinking, okay, look, this isn't my bag, I need to really engage with somebody that can make a real difference here?
Yes, so there's a certain amount that the security professionals themselves, those who are built around raising that awareness, also have a day job, and it's probably a bit of a bolt-on to them as well. They lack resource quite often, and they often lack the skills to be able to do that job, sadly. They also lack sometimes the mechanisms and the understanding of how do I break out of this ivory tower, this security team that's actually understand those people that I might meet at the tea point and those wider people across the organisation. That comes very unnaturally to some people as well. I've seen it where people working in security actually lack the confidence in their own skill set, that then worry that if someone asks me a question I can't answer, it's all going to fall to pot. And there's a certain reticence of actually getting down into people because it might expose my own frailties and my own weaknesses at the same time. If it was easy, I think we'd all do it. I think we suffer from insecurity, a similar thing to IT. No one ever phones up and says, well, the IT's really slick today, it's doing a brilliant job. We only moan kind of when it doesn't work. That's normally when you hear from users when it comes to IT, or the fact that they don't want the latest change. Likewise, security, is always trying to prove a negative. We did this stuff and nothing happened. Isn't that good?
Yeah.
And it's something that the normal user doesn't have that interest in. We don't sell IT. We don't sell the benefits of it. We're getting slightly better at it. We certainly don't sell the benefits of security and what that means to the organisation and what the user, the customer's role in that is and why what they do is vital.
Okay. The customer's role in doing that, how would you summarise that in terms of, achieving the security objectives? This is your role, because I think there is this tendency. I mean, I know working with organisations that sometimes a lot of the people on the shop floor, so to speak, think, oh, that's for the IT security or information security function. That that's their responsibility, and so there's still a bit of a distance between people recognising that it's a well-used phrase, but it's everyone's responsibility. Why do you think that people are struggling with that?
I think there's two aspects to it. I think security is not great at going out to other areas of the business that they have dependencies upon. So, for example, working with the likes of procurement to make sure the right stipulations are in contracts. Traditionally, outsourced contracts are predicated on availability and might have a couple of bits about security, and we need to start building awareness in there, or making sure that where our procurement teams look to procure asset disposal, they make sure they've got the right organisation that will do the right things with our assets to make sure the data's purged before we then try and recycle. And them understand why. Work with the asset management guys to make sure actually the better we know our assets, the easier it is for me as security to do my job. And I can also work with you to make sure when procurement do their bit to get the assets, we get the best of both worlds. I think we don't recognise that we all play a hub and spoke model within an organisation. So security as a hub will have many spokes off the side of it.
Yeah.
And each one of those is a hub in its own right, and we may well be a spoke off those. And we don't join the dots and build up that almost interrelated DNA within the organisation, because we all work in these siloed little entities. At the same time, then we don't take that down another level. That's one way to actually build a bit of a relationship between different teams. So actually, when you talk to them about how they can affect the security of an organisation, they kind of can start to understand the role they play. So procurement starts to understand why we need to make sure that our suppliers do the right thing and don't just transfer our data anywhere, or don't just stick our discs on eBay because we get a cheap return on those and we get a bit more money back and it's price effective. They actually understand what that means and how we put data at risk, or how we put the organisation at risk, or how we put the finances at risk, or how we put the employees themselves at risk by playing with their data. Yeah. Without building those relationships, we still keep that divorcement from those different areas, and then the divorcement of the employees or the customers in those teams from how their role is actually really important in us securing the mission of the organisation. Procurement's there about, well, can I get the best bang for my buck? Can I get the best price? Because the cheaper I get it, the more profit we make in the long run. But also to make sure that actually we need to maximise how we protect the assets and treat that in the same way that we would kind of, the underlying accounts of the organisation, because each can have a detrimental effect.
Yeah. So, in fact, what we're talking about here is that we have to break through the silo. We have to sort of engage with a variety of other, dependencies, as you call it, but, business functions, people that we're going to be relying upon to help us achieve our goals. In the process of them facilitating a discussion with those dependent partners, they sort of, we're helping them become aware, and probably that activity is more useful than, just giving them a CBT program at the end of the day. Yeah?
Yeah, 100%. But it also does play into, some of the aspects that Gert said, certainly around that almost that cultural ignorance that we seem to have. And that's not just kind of across geographic boundaries that, procurement is run from Germany and marketing is run from the UK or whatever it happens to be, or we've got different locations in each. Even within say just a UK-centric one building, wherever with a number of employees, there'll be cultural differences between the employees. There'll be cultural differences between how each one of those teams run within the organisation. So we know that payroll have got certain days where they're going to be stressed to the nth degree. Mm-hmm. So let's not give them a whole heap of work to do when it's payroll run, because that's the most important thing to do. But each one of those interdepartments within the organisation will operate culturally, and each of the individuals will be culturally different. We don't recognise those different dynamics at the same time. As Gert said, that can take a lifetime to understand. And if you've ever worked in the civil service, you'll know why it might take a lifetime to understand. But at least that mutual understanding of how each other operates, and the drivers behind each one, and what level each one needs to go to. So some areas will want to go to the nth degree of detail, and others just want summary. And you've got to be able to flex and meet that customer need and that customer demand.
So how does that? I've often heard the phrase, challenge between efficiency and effectiveness when it comes to designing any form of awareness activity. So I'm sort of inclined to agree with you and with Gert, which is that you've really got to take into consideration, if this is your audience, okay, for change, and you're going to communicate with them, whichever way it is, you've got to understand the cultural context around your different audience. People turn around to me and go, that's too nuanced. How can I do it for everyone? How can I please everyone? And so you end up with this, we'll just do one size fits all. and people turn around and go, yeah, I can afford that. Now, the thing for me in my head, I'd love to know your thoughts on this, is you can afford that, but if it doesn't produce the results, why spend it in the first place? Yeah,
I wholeheartedly agree. You're going to be probably spending money because it's unlikely you'll have built your own CBT awareness training. You might have done, but even so, that requires effort from people to build it. And then you're requiring all the people in the organisation to waste half an hour of their day doing something that it doesn't resonate with them in any way. It's not effective in any way and doesn't achieve any outcome if you've even defined an outcome. So why bother? Other than you're ticking a box, you may as well just send a memo round once a year, a little Word document memo, and send it round once a year, because it's about as effective. And it's a lot cheaper.
I think the interesting point there is, what is and this goes back to what is the objective behind all of this? I did my first webinar yesterday, where I was sort of sharing some ideas around the work that we've done around rethinking the human factor. And one of the things that came out is, if your objective is just to mitigate the risk to your own organization, in the sense that when something goes wrong, you can point out that everybody's had some degree of awareness training, it's almost transferring the risk down to the employees, which it doesn't foster trust within an organization. And that's a real issue at the moment. Globally, people are less trusting of the people that they work for. So you don't want to give them more excuses. So I do think that there is a real issue there. The other point, just listening to you and you talking, and you sort of like, we talked about, it's taken up half an hour of my day. I've not really learned anything. It's not really engaging. What is the damage that bad awareness does to the security brand? And how does that damage to the brand, if you want to think about it, when they get a phone call from the security function or they get an email, what is it they think, and how does that then have an impact upon you as a sort of business function, being able to bring around the change you need in other areas?
Yeah, so obviously two aspects to that, and I think you're absolutely right with the trust aspect, and effectively that in the event of something going wrong, I can say, look, I ticked the box. Everyone in the employee, apart from 3 people who are off on maternity leave, all did the mandatory security training, and it's like, well, that's brilliant, but something still went wrong. So how did that happen? Because you've raised awareness, yet something still went wrong, and let's face it, it's very unlikely to be an uber sophisticated, multiple zero-day attack from name a nation state. It's likely to be very rudimentary, basic errors, and not just human errors, but errors across the organization, like a firewall with too many rules, your IDS system's really not doing anything, no one's doing anything with it, no one collects any logs, you've got no idea how many assets you've got no idea how many users, and someone's ultimately done something at one end that they didn't know they should or shouldn't do and have accidentally clicked on something. And Bob's your uncle, you've had a load of problems. One of those things, and I think this is where, hopefully, he says with fingers crossed, lucky rabbit's foot and all that, I think the GDPR actually brings something more. So with the Data Protection Act, we had technical and organisational measures. Let's face it, most people ignored the Data Protection Act. So aside from that, we had technical organisational measures. But it very much played into the ethos of, I have a firewall, that's good. I do security education and awareness training, that's good. That tick box. Hopefully when the GDPR comes into it is more that demonstrate the effectiveness of that control. Okay, so with a firewall, I need to understand the rules on it, and I also need to understand the ports and protocols in use across my network and why I have those ports open on my firewall to allow those through. Is it an effective control? And I think the same rings true for the security education and awareness piece, that we get beyond that kind of, okay, so everyone goes through this and everyone passes it, but have you actually raised awareness? How do you measure it? What was your desired outcome? What was your mission? How do you continue to improve this? And I think most organizations will be found wanting. Where we literally annoy the customer by forcing them to do this once a year alongside health and safety and their diversity training that I must do mandatory once a year, and we build in various security mechanisms and controls or aspects of this service that we provide that hinders business performance and hinders the customer's ability to do their job, we just piss them off more and more and more. So the more we ask them to do stuff, the more they're going to ignore it. And in fact, they're going to see us as a detrimental impact on their daily life, that those bloody security people have done something else. And now they're asking me to do this. And you almost build an adversarial view of security. Whereas actually, we should be the people to put our arm around and say, we love what you're trying to do. Can we help you do it in a slightly less risky way, but absolutely achieve that outcome? Let's work together. There might be a better way of doing it. Come on, let's get into bed together and really drive this forwards.
Yeah. See, I mean, doing that in itself is an awareness. I mean, my personal view is what part of information security isn't about raising awareness in some capacity, or what part of it isn't about trying to influence behavior, whether it's the behavior of, somebody on the inside, one of your customers, or somebody on the outside that you don't really know. You're still trying you're trying to influence behavior or the outcome of that behavior, aren't you? So it's I'm very much. I remember going through the ISO 27001 framework, and I was like, okay, that's awareness. That's awareness that was specifically resulting in behavior. And actually, when I did it all, I was like, yeah, it's all just awareness and behavior, just that day-to-day stuff, and that's without actually looking at having an education and awareness program.
Yep.
And actually, it's sort of, listening to you, it sort of brings me back to, it's a point that Robert was making, which was around the design of things. And he was talking about, we sort of make this assumption that if we provide people with information, that they're basically going to process it like a computer, and it's going to be a case of a 0 or a 1 in terms of the outcome, and that they're going to actually, logic will dictate that they always comply with your policy and processes and your procedures. Now, in that, we talked about behavioral economics, but there's another angle which I'm really interested in, which is behavioral design. And it's like, if your objective is to influence behavior within an organization to reduce risk, then what part? So this falls outside of education and awareness, but it shares the same objective. What part does understanding how behaviors are formed and influenced, and then incorporating that into how you design security in the first place, put aside the education awareness program. I was watching there was an article on the BBC report about how organizations are using behavioral design principles to make you engage with their platform a lot more. So whether it be LinkedIn, Facebook, TripAdvisor, or phone manufacturers, people that are designing phones to make you engage with them more, which is basically to influence behavior. Have you ever come across the concept of behavioral design, and have you ever thought that it might have a role to play in terms of what we do from a security perspective?
Yeah, I do. And firstly, I absolutely echo you that everything I do in my day job is raising awareness and effectively marketing the security function. Right from going out and doing talks with different areas. So whether it's the PA community or the marketing team or whichever team, I'm absolutely selling security. To every single email I receive and respond to is me actually selling security, and everything I do and how I respond to that, and recognizing that every single email I receive, no matter how frustrating they might be, is a customer. So treat them as I would like to be treated. Not always easy. In terms of behavioral design and those aspects, absolutely. It's one of those interesting ones that I don't think we pay enough service to. I don't think we pay enough service to behavior, full stop. And you understand, within an organization, anyone who's done a quality audit knows the whole difference between the actual written down procedure and what human beings do. Yeah. And even so, with the same procedure, you've got Bob, you've got Ken, and you've got Sue, and all three of them do it in their own nuanced way. And none of that matches exactly what's written down. And there's that human factor that actually says that, hang on a minute, this seems to be a bit of an agile process because we've got three different people achieving the same outcome, but by going through different mechanisms to achieve it. How do we try and bring that into some kind of conformity, knowing that actually there's a likelihood that at least two of those people will be resistant to it because it's changing how they do their day-to-day life. And how do we actually get them built into that process to understand that what we're trying to build will actually make it more efficient to them, or actually get them to drive it? Because there may be a fourth way to do it that combines a bit of all three. I don't think, where a lot of the technology industry has got into that behavioral design, that I am making this fit for my consumer base, but I'm also changing the way they interact with me to almost steer them to where I want them to go, whether that's through ease of use or UX design, whatever it happens to be, that actually I'm building something around my user base to actually then bring a commonality between them and how they interact and how they engage, and then drive that uptake. I don't think we're anywhere near that, to be honest. I think, first of all, we need to actually understand what human beings are, as in real human beings, not those security people that we like to hide in our ivory tower. The real ones, the scary ones, the ones that click on links in emails and do all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. The ones that send all their personal data home because it's easier to work on a home computer because the one at work's too restrictive, and all that good stuff, and actually understand why. Why am I causing you to do this?
Right. Nail on the head. I think it's really interesting. There are 2 points I'm going to pick up there. Why? I've had this sort of mantra. When somebody tells me something, I've got to ask why 5 times almost.
Yes.
And generally, by the time I got to the 5th one, I'm like, okay, we've pretty much exhausted this. And I'm like, I've generally got to the root cause behind it. and actually understanding why people choose not to comply. Okay, and it's sort of when you go through that process, I think it's really enlightening. One, to a certain degree, you end up finding, God, I never thought about these things. So, how are behaviours formed?
Yeah, and I don't understand how these people operate, and therefore I've not designed what I do around the way they work, because they're critical to the business as much as I am. Whereas I've written it from what I think is a perfect standpoint and a very prejudiced standpoint, which I won't recognise when I do it. But I've never actually understood that different areas of the business operate differently, have different requirements. The individuals there have different requirements. They've got different levers. They've got different drivers. They've got different pressures. And I don't understand how I need to make things fit for a flexible, effectively workforce, and a disparate workforce in terms of how they operate as human beings and how they operate as their individual silos within the organisation. And instead, I throw my hand grenade policy from the top of my ivory tower, and then sometimes at some point wonder why no one complies with it, or without actually understanding that half the people haven't even bothered to read it.
Yeah, so it's an awareness activity in itself. Like going back to earlier, it's like I need to become more aware as a security professional of my audience, and when I become more aware of my audience along the lines of the agreed objectives, then I can design things more effectively, and that could be anything from designing the actual control environment. It could be something as simple as how I write the policy. I mean, this is an interesting one, actually. The whole thing that this internal communication, you have a policy for internal comms, it strips out all the emotion, all the value and everything about it, so that you've got this standard approach to communicating internally. But that's the stuff that actually makes it interesting to people.
Yes, it absolutely does. The moment it just becomes, it's almost like reading the terms and conditions of signing up for a new, you sign up for Facebook or something, and it throws up the terms and conditions, or you do the latest update to, your iPhone or whatever, and there's terms and conditions, and it's all just bland, and I don't want to read it because it's just a ball ache. As you say, there's no emotion in there. There's no rationale. There's no humour. Wow, security people, we forget humour is actually quite a good thing, albeit, you don't want to go too far, we miss that whole ethos. I mean, that whole kind of understanding we've all got policies, we've all got procedures, we've been doing security for quite a while within an organisation. When you get down to grassroots level and actually start to talk to people and you allow them to tell us what that does to them, we realise very quickly how bad we are at our job, and it's really scary. Essentially what we're doing is we're opening our second eye, and looking out and actually realising that, do you know what? I'm not particularly effective. But only when you realise that can you start to build, right, so how do I become effective? How do I work with these people to make sure I provide them the service they require? And part of that is being human. And even in written communication and in policy, things like that, of being human, show them that it's not just black and white written, black and white on an intranet page, thou shalt not, and in this language that I don't want to read, this language that doesn't explain to me why I shouldn't do that. What are the risks of doing that? How does that potentially have an impact on the organisation? How does it have an impact on me as an individual? We lose that human aspect of, the people at the end of this, the consumers, our customers are humans, and I'm a human being, so why am I not talking to them as a human?
Yeah. When people think about the human factor, and this is one of the things when I started doing my research 6 years ago, I was like, okay, well, let's sort of take a step. Everyone's really eager to get to the solution. I completely get that. I'm eager to get the solution as well. But sometimes what you have to do is just take a step back and actually, don't make assumptions about what you mean by the human factor. It's like, okay, well, I'm assuming that I know what it means to be human. And actually, from my research, I very quickly realised I didn't really have, I had a picture which was based upon my own experiences and what I knew. And actually, it was quite limited. And the end result was huge amounts of research. But, a great phrase for me is, can you think of a phrase, Ed, which is like, what does it mean to be human to something is to be human?
Yeah, so it's one of those that just by speaking there, you got me thinking that. So I'm 42 years old. Do I actually understand who I am?
No, I know.
Let alone what a human is, let alone what everyone else is, and all the nuances in there. And yet that human factor is absolutely integral to every single thing we do as a security professional, even if you think about the threat as well. So there isn't a cyber threat in the history of cyber threats that doesn't start with a human being, whether that's a nation state, whether it's organized crime, whether it's a kid in a bedroom, whether it's a hacktivist, doesn't matter. There's a human being at the end of it. And we're so myopic in this view that it's all technological and it's all black and white. And actually, throughout the value chain of everything we do, it's human all the way. Yeah. It's the only constant.
Yeah, absolutely. That's somebody said to me, we were asking me about risk, and I said, look, if it wasn't for humans, there'd be no such thing as risk. It's a human thing.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. And you're like, okay, yeah, this is the importance of the human. When you talk about the elephant in the room, it just, this elephant's been getting bigger and bigger in the security room, and nobody's really wanted to tackle it. And I partly believe that a lot of our industry is driven through technology and technology vendors, and they definitely have a role to play. But it's sort of maybe focused ourselves, and this is very human, looking for shortcuts, looking for the quick, easy wins. Okay. Because actually, when you come to tackling the human factor, it takes a different way of things. Going back to your point, which is, really, you've got to understand people to better design things to reduce risk. And so this is the bit that I think is missing. But I'm seeing more of it popping into industry discussion now. Is what does it mean to be human? And the phrase I come back to is, to err is to be human. Basically, to make mistakes is to be human. And we used it actually in the webinar the other day, and it resonated with people. They go, yeah, people just make mistakes, which then raises the following question. If people make mistakes, if we can't guarantee, people will 100% comply, and you've only got to look at, the number of people that, have some sort of, don't wear their seatbelt, smoke when they know that they shouldn't, don't do any exercise, do 10 miles above the speed limit, all that sort of stuff. So this happens all the time around us. Mm-hmm. Should education and awareness be a risk exercise? Question for you, because it seems to me that we've matured around general information security, IT security, whatever brand you want to give it, to understand it's about risk management. Do you think people are actually approaching the challenge of education and awareness and influencing behaviour from a risk management perspective? Or do you think they're sort of taking what happened 15 years ago where, my experience, when I used to speak to people and they say, yeah, we've got security sorted. And I would say, well, what do you mean by that? And they go, well, we've got antivirus on our desktops and laptops. We've got it on the servers. We've got, email gateway filtering through all the email that's coming through, looking for this, that, and that. We've got a firewall. We've got IDS. And these are all great tactical interventions. They all have some value or other. But what we quickly realize is, well, none of this is ever going to secure us. We've got to have this risk-based approach. Do you think we have that in education and awareness?
So there's kind of three aspects in one sense to that. So absolutely, yeah. So you see, people still driving without their seatbelts on, absolutely, and driving like maniacs, well above the speed limit, or people, running out in between parked cars, And what's scary about that is that these are people choosing to accept a risk, and an absolute tangible risk with cause and effect.
Yeah.
If I run out into the road between parked cars and there's something coming, that big thing is going to hit me like a train and it's not going to end well. And yet I still do it.
Yeah.
When we talk about security, it's a far more intangible risk. And certainly when we badge it up in the lovely buzzwords that we like to throw about, like cyber, it's completely intangible to people what this risk is and what the threats are and what the potential impact is, because I can't see it. I can see a moving car. I can absolutely see a moving car and recognize if that thing clicks me, it's not going to be pleasant.
Yeah.
Whereas cyber information security, whatever you want to call it, is far more intangible. No, I don't think we do a risk-based approach to education awareness. I think one of the fundamentals behind that is most organizations are terrible at risk management. I think many of them do risk assessment and do theoretical risk. I don't think very many actually join the dots back up to make it a full circle. that what are the tangible risks? How do I know? Because risk is a constantly moving entity. Every single parameter that makes up a risk, whether it's your threat source, threat actor, threat, vulnerabilities, weaknesses, exploits, likelihood, impact, all of these are continually moving and they're all measurable. And at no point do we really use them and measure them to then determine what our strategic and operational outcomes need to be and our operation and tactical decisions have to be. And likewise, we don't use that mechanism to actually drive out our awareness along these cognizant threats that we're aware of, or the weaknesses or vulnerabilities, be they technical or procedural or process or every aspect therein. And we don't use that to really drive awareness, because that gives us some tangible aspects that we can go and show people and actually make that explanatory kind of discussion and conversation much more real. We can actually say, look, these are the things that are genuinely happening. We can see these, and these are the things that have stopped them. This is how we need to evolve, how we need to raise. This is where we need you to come and play with us as well. We need you to be part of this security culture and the defenses of the organization. Because as you said, none of these things in isolation are going to protect us. And sadly, with many of the technological tools, we buy things in silos. And then we leave them alone forever and a day and then wonder why they don't actually work. And we probably pay even less attention to the human beings, the customers, beyond this once a year pointless exercise of getting them to tick a box.
So I'm going to take you back to the first point you made about almost the sense of, you were talking about, when you cross a road, for example, there you can see the car coming, and you can the risk is almost tangible in the sense that you can actually see that. Whereas with information security, there's almost a sense of I'm committing all this time to doing the training or changing my behaviour by actually complying, and you don't actually see the benefits of that. You don't get sort of like immediate feedback, which is one of the things around behaviour that that I've learned, is the need to give sort of feedback quite quickly when people do things and when they change. Otherwise, they fall into this. Okay, I don't know what this means. I mean, did what I do stop an attack?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% with you, and even some of those aspects, So having worked in security and having to have to ring a user. A customer, as I'd like to call them, that has clicked on an email or done something or potentially got something a bit wonky on their machine. And the moment you say you phone from security, you can almost feel the tension on the phone line. You can almost smell the fear, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
And half of my battle is putting them at ease. But also when someone self-reports things too, it needs to be almost congratulatory. Yeah. To say, brilliant, we're not going to, we need you as that early warning system. We'll absolutely, and feedback what the effect of that was. Obviously, if it's something serious, there's only so far you can go, but you can tell them what role they played in helping to protect the organization by bringing that awareness to us. You spotted something that looked wrong. Awesome. I can't ask for any more from you. Fantastic. Now get everyone else to do it. Be my Jesuit missionary within the organization. Let's build this culture together,
Yeah, good news stories are a core part of actually building any story. If you look back at any culture at like a national level or organizational level or even, demographic levels, there are always these myths and legends which underpin the basic core values of any given culture. And so if you're out there, the point you make is great about the brand is just like people live in fear of hearing from security. But if actually their experience of having engaged with security is, wow, yeah, I get congratulated and thanked, and they're really happy to hear from me. It gives a different sort of vibe to it. It sort of starts to remold the security brand. And then, ambassador, Jesuit, or whatever, these people go out there and go, well, I know you say that, but actually my experience wasn't that. My experience was good, and they were really grateful that I actually ran through with the problem.
And just we don't take the time to say thanks. Of course we don't. We like to moan and we don't say thank you to people, and we certainly don't take the time then to let so someone self-reports something through. Brilliant, you've actually put us on the front foot in trying to prevent something that could go wrong. It takes me no effort whatsoever to thank that person. It takes me no effort whatsoever to go to their line manager and tell them that this person's done something awesome. Thank you so much. That's made our life as security much easier. Brilliant. Can you offer thanks as well through that route, and just take the time to treat them as they've done exactly what you want them to do. And we shouldn't treat that as, we expect good service. So we don't praise good service. We admonish bad service. Whereas actually from the security angle, we want good service. If we get it, we should bloody well be thankful and make it visible.
Yeah. Again, it's awareness, isn't it?
100%.
It's the other way around. It's the old, communication is a two-way thing.
Yes. Yeah. And you do run the danger that, in some respects, so that person's seen something that looks wrong, and then they tell their friends, someone else has seen something similar, and goes, oh, you need to let Ed know about that. And there's a danger that you become a single point of contact.
Yeah.
But you can gradually migrate them into the genericism of where they need to report things. But I'd rather they told me as an individual rather than no one.
Absolutely.
We've got to build it up slowly.
So no EdBot then at the end of the line that's going to have some sort of AI attached to it. So it's fielding all the questions on behalf of Ed.
Yeah, that's what I need. I think. I think Donald Trump's got most of them at the moment.
So I guess coming to the end of this chat, but it's interesting because I'm not sure if you're aware, but I set up a project called the Analogies Project 6 years ago, and the core part of the Analogies Project was about trying to understand what lessons can we learn through using analogy from areas outside of cybersecurity, and this is a key theme of everything that I do. In fact, the podcast is mainly about interviewing people from outside of the security industry, because the challenge of awareness, behavior, and culture is definitely not unique to us in cyber. And then getting them to sort of share their lessons and to draw that analogy. And it was an interesting one because there's quite a lot of research now around retirement planning.
Yeah.
And one of the problems that they discovered here in the UK, but also in the US, and a number of other countries as well, is that and I remember this when I first started work, and I wasn't on a particularly large salary, and they basically was like, okay, this is the contribution, because I was working for within the public sector, and they go, okay, so this percentage can go into your pension, and I remember looking at this, I'm going, well, that could get me a load of beer. Okay, and I was at that age. I was, but when I was below the age of 25, and let's be quite frank about it. I was like interested in short-term benefit, something that materialized immediately, almost, or at least by next weekend. And I didn't have this long-term view, because you couldn't see the benefit of it. Now, the whole idea when I was 25 about thinking about something which was going to materialize when I was, well, back then it would have been 62, and now it's obviously quite a bit older in terms of when you're going to expect your pension. But, it's interesting because actually that boils down to the challenge that we face when dealing with people within organizations about cyber. It's like, unless it's something they can feel, they can get feedback from very quickly, they can see the difference that it makes. You're asking them to change their behavior, to invest in changing their behavior, to retain knowledge, okay, to have a degree of competency about fulfilling their roles and expectations about something that even if it goes wrong, people might not know about it.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that there are that challenge, that sort of time challenge, isn't unique to cybersecurity. And I think the retirement industry has really done a lot of work in that area. And there's motivations for doing it, obviously, in terms of getting people to put money aside. And that's, organizations will hold that for you and invest it, and they'll make some money out of that. But it does seem to me that a lot of the challenges that we're facing are things that are quite common outside of the cybersecurity industry. And it's about letting down our sort of industry silo, if you want to think about it. You've used the word silos in terms of within organizations. I think there's this industry silo potentially as well, where we look inwards, and people use the phrase echo chambers. But the challenge is a consistent challenge outside. And it's whether or not do you think we're at a stage where we're prepared to listen to other people outside of the industry?
It's certainly something that we should. And you're absolutely right that I think, too much is dealt with in the immediacy, that I have done something, therefore there must be an immediate impact. And I think we fail to measure, to be honest, in a lot of ways, that actually what we've done, albeit we're trying to prove a negative in a lot of cases, but how do I measure the effectiveness of what I've just done? Whether that's across the organisation, on individuals, or in terms of deterring the super sophisticated cyber threats with my next generation AI infused whatever magic bean juice. But yeah, we are very much a very introspective industry, and we're a very incestuous industry as well. We might occasionally play with our kind of bastard cousins in IT, but we don't tend to play with anyone else. And absolutely, a lot of the struggles that we face are those that are common across many different sectors and industries. And I don't think we actually air those out in a sufficient way. I don't think we're helped because our industry is predicated on fear. The security industry is vendor driven because it's money, and that's not a problem in a sense. It's similar to military and that side, that it's all about fear and it's all about buying. There must be spend, whereas actually spend can be non-financial as well. Actually, what works well in some other areas could equally be transposed into security, and we can learn from other disciplines and they can learn from us in terms of what works, what doesn't work. We're all ultimately dealing in some respect with people in some aspects. We're dealing with complex issues. We're dealing with, as you say, that immediacy. We're dealing with a disparate force. We're dealing with lots of external factors, and we're dealing with a market that's trying to push us down a certain way. And that's common across many disciplines. And I don't see why we shouldn't engage with other disciplines to actually find that commonality of experience and actually work together to find more fruitful outcomes. Because at the moment, it just feels the security industry, we're perpetuating almost the same cycle of failure. And we're not actually maturing and learning properly. We're buying the next technology, but not understanding how it operates within a business, and lacking that fundamental business empathy to understand the effect it has on the business, and also whether over time the business model will alter the effectiveness of that control. And we just seek to buy our way out of the problem and find the easy route, rather than actually doing the real fundamental basics, like engaging with our customers for a start and understanding what drives them, or understanding that we need to maybe audit our firewalls once in a blue moon, or have a clue how many assets we've got, or maybe tie up our user accounts to our number of employees in some regard, and building those move, add, change and those lever processes with HR. And we need to build relationships with other areas of the organization and potentially externally. The hard part is they're all really hard things, and they're all the things that we've been saying we've been doing well for years in our letters to the front in terms of C-level execs. Everything's rosy, and that perpetual lie. And I don't think as an industry we're maturing, and I'm not sure we're going to mature if we remain in isolation.
That's really interesting. I think recognizing this, this is one of the things that Gert-Jan Hofstede mentioned in his interview or podcast. For him, the way to progress on the challenge around culture was to first recognize culture. And recognize that, and that in itself is a process of yourself realizing that you have your own cultural lens, if you want to think it, or bias, and that the people you're trying to engage with have their own. And that, you bring these biases, and some of them will be helpful and some of them won't necessarily be as helpful in terms of achieving your objectives. And there is this bit of taking a step back, and this is the rethinking bit, and maybe stepping back from the assumptions that we've been making. We are where we are because of the assumptions that we've made. Okay. If where we are isn't where people want to be, or they feel that, really I want to be driving change in the organization, so we're taking a more mature approach and it's a demonstrable more approach, then you've got to step back from those assumptions. You've got to, everybody wants to move forward and they want to move forward quickly. But if you really want to bring about that change, you need to step back and think, okay, so what is it that got us to where we are, and what needs to change to get us to where we want to be? And that, for me, is a challenge that we see across the sort of like the education and awareness piece. And I think it's a reflection on the point you were making, that we're possibly making the same mistakes that we sort of made when sort of IT security matured into information security. This sense of tactical innovations, CBT, induction day, security awareness month. These are things that all have value. The question I ask people is, what is the thinking that went into it? What part of understanding your audience has helped you design these things more effectively?
Yep. And also, when was the last time that we reviewed them? When was the last time we looked to iterate? When was the last time we looked to change the way we deliver this thing? Because we've been doing it exactly the same way for a number of years now. Isn't it time that we freshened it in some regards? And just applied a different lens and a different approach, and maybe just, even if it's a different skin color to the CBT training, to make people take a bit of notice, maybe engage with them, maybe find out what they want.
It's marginal gain.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say it's all rubbish, let's start again. We need to deal with what we've actually got and the tools we have at our disposal, and we need to tweak. We need to tweak and gradually build towards a better model of delivering security alongside, the awareness that comes with that across the organisation and across the security industry, and talk wider than that and build this spider's web that actually is in some way effective. But instead, we kind of perpetuate this, doing the same things the same way. And then we'll introduce something new, and then that will just become the norm, and we'll never iterate it. We'll never change the way it operates. And we'll never look and kind of say, well, actually, we do business transformation. It's now called digital transformation. We don't really do security transformation, or we don't embed security within the digital transformation or the business transformation or the business change model. We don't tend to bring them all together.
Yeah. And that's a continuation of the silo challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And how many security people understand what their business vision is? 2020 vision, where they're going to be in 3 years' time, 2 years' time. Security's vision is probably disparate from that. It should feed off it and feed into it. And part of the risk management, if we did risk management properly, would help define some of the parameters of that business vision to understand what were the more riskier choices and the less risky choices. And they could make informed risk decisions as to where the business was going to go.
Yeah, agreed. Right. Well, it's been absolutely fantastic having a chat with you, Ed.
My pleasure.
Absolutely fantastic. And I think the thing that I've really enjoyed, as well as the podcast, is all about awareness, behaviour and culture. And there's a tendency for people to think of that, that how we address that is through the education and awareness program. But today's been a reflection, which you speak to somebody like yourself, is that it's not just the education and awareness program. It's the whole thing. Okay, it's the whole thing. The whole thing is about raising awareness. The controls you put in place are about actually influencing behavior. And the firewall is basically influencing. Somebody's trying to get, you're trying to prevent people getting in that shouldn't be getting in, and you're trying to make sure that people get out who need to get out. It's a behavioral tool. It enforces your policy, your firewall policy, which should be based upon well thought through needs aligned with risk. And I think that's the thing for me with what we're trying to do with the podcast, is say, yeah, it is education and awareness, but what part of anybody's job in security isn't about awareness or isn't about influencing behavior? And I guess that's something that sometimes we don't want to talk about, because people just like, that sounds like it's too big a task. But I think if you're going to get it right, then you need to seriously be thinking about it, and it needs to be a long view as to how you're going to implement that as well. So having you on, sort of reiterating some of that, was like, brilliant. This is really, really good. So thank you very, very, very much, Ed, for joining us and giving us your time today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I hope you found that chat with Ed, the European CISO of the Year for 2017, of interest. For me personally, it's always really rewarding to know that people like Ed invest the time to listen to the podcast, and for him to actually, be taking away points from that in terms of things he's learned, but also how it's reaffirmed some things that he knows as well, and then how he's layered on top of that his own experience. To me, that's really, really, really what this podcast is about. And so it makes me feel great that the podcast is resonating with people and is creating discussion, debate, enabling people to rethink the human factor. So what do we have happening going forward? Well, what I can tell you now is that in the next episode of the Rethinking Human Factor podcast, we've actually got a lady on who specializes in awareness and behavior and culture around health and safety. Now, a lot of people often draw analogies between health and safety and information security, so it was a natural. But this lady in particular really, really stuck out for me. I've seen a couple of things that she's been sharing through the LinkedIn platform. And, I think she really, really understands it. in the sense that, she's coming up with new ideas and she's sharing new ideas, which to me are a reflection of the research we've done on the SABAC framework, the Security Awareness, Behaviour and Culture framework. I've asked her to come and share those thoughts with you all. But also, this is really, really important, is that she's based over in Singapore. And I do think that the cultural dimension is really important to any attempt to sort of raise awareness and influence behaviour. And what our guest is going to do is she's going to highlight some of those cultural contexts that are potentially missing or are not being implemented as effective as they could be when trying to raise awareness and influence behaviour across the Far East. I think that's really important. So, we've got sort of what lessons can we learn from health and safety, but we've also got what is the cultural dimension from the perspective of somebody that's grown up, lives in the Far East. And I think that should help us sort of maybe open our minds to maybe the cultural lenses and biases that we all have. And so it's going to be a great show. I'm really, really looking forward to joining us. And that should be out in the next 4 weeks. I think the interview is in 2 weeks' time. If you're interested about what we're talking about, if you find it sort of like, okay, this is turning a light on, but I want to know more, well, the good news is that I personally am running a number of webinars. I also have my book coming out in about 2 months' time, and you can now pre-register for that at the marmaladebox.com website or at my own personal website, brucehallis.com. And the other thing, which is good news, is that, we're rolling out the training, the workshops that we do. So, we've had some great success around that. People wanted to know, okay, please share with me, the data, the science, to help me to make better decisions about how I design my education and awareness programs. So, you can now come and join us on our workshops, and they should be available via the marmaladebox.com website as well. If you want to stay in contact with us, post GDPR, of course, then there are a number of ways that you can do that. And you can go and sign up to one of the ways that we communicate with you. You can either sign up for, if you want to be kept abreast of the podcast, you can sign up to our service to let you know what the latest podcast is and when it's come out. You can also reach out and ask to be kept informed of things on a weekly basis, things that we found interesting, offers we have, that type of thing as well. And also you can stay in contact with us with our own range of nudges, as we like to call them, nudges and reminders about things that are going on that we think are personally very interesting in the awareness, behaviour and culture space. And you can do all that at the marmaladebox.com website. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found that chat with Ed of interest. I really hope that you can join us for our next conversation with our expert around health and safety and how to raise awareness and influence behaviour and culture in relation to that. That should be out in about 4 weeks' time. And in the meantime, I wish you well.